Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and this is probably going to be the last video I do on this, the 2417 Mini CNC machine. This thing has been an interesting experience. I've had it for a while now, but not really used it all that much. After the last video I did where I looked at it and kind of all of the learning experiences that I had buying it and using it for the first couple of times, I basically stopped using it because I broke it. It turns out that ramming the bit while it's moving into a clamp causes these tiny little brass tubes that are the effective collet for this machine to break, and break quite badly. For a while I thought I had thrown something out of square in the machine. I thought I'd broken one of these 3D printed parts that make up the entire carriage assembly up the top here. But as it turns out, all it was a break in the tiny little brass collet piece, and it meant that there was a misalignment with where the motor spindle was and where the bit came out. And yeah, basically, it just meant that all I needed to do was replace this little thing and everything was good. However, I did do that. I found where these brass collets come from. I found new ones, but I couldn't find them in the exact size that I needed, so I had to buy special drill bits and set up a lot of stuff so that I could drill out one of these things as very straight as I possibly could. And I did indeed manage to do that. Once I had a new collet done and dusted, I set the machine back up and I have been using it for a little while since then, cutting a decent number of parts, including most of a combat robot. There was a couple of pieces that I didn't trust this machine to do, so I went and used a bigger machine at a different place. However, when I first got the machine set up again with the new collet in place, I found out something quite interesting. The markings on the motor here are backwards. I did my first couple of cuts and they came out jagged and rough and horrible because the bit that I was using was set up to spin only one way and one way only. And doing that, it did still manage to cut, but it was friction cutting. So it was basically spinning fast enough that it was just melting through the plastic, and the cuts that I got out of it were garbage. So it took a little while, it took a bunch of tests. Eventually I worked it out by testing the spindle. Basically, I spun the spindle up without a bit in it, touched the spinning part with a piece of paper and saw which way the paper flexed and told me that the spindle was going backwards. So because this is just a DC motor, all I did was I flipped the two wires going into it around, so red into the negative and black into the positive, and it actually started working, and it worked pretty well to start with. Anyway, like I said, I cut basically an entire combat robot, a 1.3 kilo combat robot on this machine now, and it did okay. It survived basically all of that. The problem is that I've been using it for a while. I started to get a little bit more complacent with it, and what happened is I had been tightening down the bit into the actual collet and not been tightening the collet back onto the motor constantly, and eventually I actually ran a cut and the bit slipped out off the motor and actually slammed into the bed, broke the bit, broke the collet again, and it's not gone very well. So realistically, this machine is semi-capable. You can do things with it, but this stupid brass collet lets it down every single time. Anything you do that is even minorly going to break something, it's going to break the collet immediately, and these are a pain to source and then have to drill out and all of that kind of stuff. So today we're gonna do something drastic. We're gonna do an upgrade, but we're going to basically strip out this motor and jam in a much, much bigger one. Okay, this is not going well. So I've got 2 bearings in on the underside here, and then getting a 3rd bearing in, and it's going in crooked, which is not good, especially considering this is supposed to be lined up with the bearing on the underside, and everything should be nice and flat and flush, but it's really not. So this just looks like these holes have come out a little bit undersized, and I could go in and fix those hole sizes, but these do need to be a press fit so that they stay in place. I'm actually thinking instead what I'm going to do is going to take a cue from the old version and add these slits which allow you to expand the gaps that you can then put the bearings in and then close everything down and screw them back together. So I'm going to modify this file, and I'll hopefully get this up on Thingiverse before I put this video live. So I'm going to modify that with those same slits and same bolt holes and everything in there, and then reprint this, which was a 13-hour print that we're going to have to redo. Don't know how I'm going to get these bearings out. I might just have to cut this off the bearings to get them back out again, but that's something I will deal with off camera. Hopefully we'll get this printed and get a new version done. So I changed my mind and printed a different mount that I found on Thingiverse. This one has basically all of the features that I want in it. The only thing I'm a little worried about is that this actual clamp piece might be a little bit thin, but I think this is good enough for now because I don't really intend on using this machine too much longer. This is more a stopgap measure. We're going to get the rest of the bearings in here and then lock this together with some screws, because this one does actually have those nice fins up the side, which should be really, really good for us.
Quite a while later, and it is now in. And there's a couple of things to talk about. First of all is this blue painter's tape, which is not ideal in any way, shape or form, but the 3D print is just a little bit oversized. Even with the bolts or the screws tightening this thing down fully, there's still a little bit of slop in everything, so I didn't want the part pushing up on the motor and it sliding up rather than cutting in, so blue painter's tape. And then there's also the pile of mistakes and disappointments that happened when doing this project. So the very first one was obviously the first attempt at printing this exact piece I've got in here, which is now completely destroyed because I had to get all the bearings back out of it, kind of. And then the second one was the other one I showed on camera, which is the clamp style one, which actually worked really well right up until the point where it didn't actually fit. Then I printed another one, which was just going to take the original metal clamp used for this motor on it, but it also didn't work because, weirdly enough, there's apparently 2 different versions of the 2417, and these 2 parts that I have in my hand have a different bearing spacing and bearing block layout than this one and the original part that came on my machine, so they didn't fit in here. And thankfully, after printing both of these failed attempts, I did actually sit there in my slicer, and every new thing I tried out, I put it into the slicer. I lined everything up to see if they would fit this or if they would fit that. And everything I could see online, most things are this style, and only this particular part is this style, the one that's actually going to fit my machine. It's a little tight. I think the tolerances aren't fully there. It's certainly more tight in some places, so it actually might just be the lead screw or the actual nut on the lead screw maybe. I don't really know. I'm hoping that with a bit of wear in that comes out okay. Anyway, it's time to hook all of this stuff up and hopefully cut some parts. Okay, so let's just check the things we didn't change. Cool, so that's working. Whoops. Went the wrong way. That is working. Let's try this. No. That's not working. Uh-oh. Okay.
And unfortunately, now we're done. That last clip, we had trouble raising and lowering the new motor and new motor mount. I figured that it was going to be something to do with the actual motor mount and not the weight of the new spindle. And I was right on that. If I took the new spindle out, it had trouble raising and lowering an empty motor mount, which wasn't a good sign. Pulling everything apart and kind of messing around with it a little bit, I've realized that the shaft that goes from the top to the bottom here was not quite aligned with the nut that was in the new 3D printed piece. So I figured that it was just another problem where an online design did not fit the exact machine that I have. However, since then I put the old spindle mount back on and it now doesn't work with this spindle mount. And on top of that, this spindle mount is actually now cracked from being taken off and put back on again. So the whole thing is kind of dead, or at least this whole section here is kind of dead. There is one thing that I could do about that, and that would be to completely change up this carriage that slides back and forth. There is, again, designs online for that I could potentially use and change up that entire carriage. But that is a lot of work, it's also a lot of printing, and if I'm gonna do that much work and that much printing, I want a better machine out of it than this thing. So I am probably going to just scrap this entire machine and work on something new. I haven't decided if I'm going to do a 3D printed CNC machine like the MP CNC, or if I'm just going to go ahead and buy something like a 6040 and just replace this thing outright with something that's basically ready to go when it gets to me, maybe with a little bit of assembly, that type of thing. Yeah, but like I said, it's annoying. It's been a lot of work and it's very frustrating, and this machine isn't even exactly what I need it to be. I actually need it to be bigger than it is right now for it to be more useful to me. So I feel like I'm pumping time and effort into something that's not doing the job that I want it to do. Yes. Well, that's going to be it, I think. If you have any thoughts on a CNC machine that I should be looking at to replace this thing, or if you know of someone, preferably in Australia, who wants to have a review done of a CNC machine, let me know in the comments down below. That would be really good, because like I said, I am just gonna ditch this thing and do something better, because this is not good. Anyway, that's gonna be it for this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed that one, and I will see you in the next one.